Okay, hey guys, we're back with Yogis on the Road, and I am here just like every Wednesday, almost, with Guy and Alexis.
Hi, Giuseppe.
Hey guys.
Hi. Guy.
So today we're thinking, since we're sort of like almost approaching the end of our talks on the 8 limbs of yoga, and then there is all this stuff going on that we've talked about the KPJ and the harassment and the Bikram and the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris and all this stuff. What is the point of all this? What is the point of like our practice, Guy? What do you think? Why do we do this?
In that context, it's probably very confusing, I would say. Forget about all the Lamborghinis and all the rest of that, I would say. Mm-hmm. What's the purpose of yoga practice? Bringing it down to...
Lamborghini-asana.
It's quite interesting. I see plenty of yoga teachers writing, I don't know what is the purpose of yoga. I don't know why we practice. And I guess they're kind of expressing the idea that maybe yoga is something different for different people. There are different motivations and possibly different outcomes. But I think Patanjali is quite clear. I mean, there are two ways in which the word yoga is used in the Yoga Sutra. The first one is yoga is citta-vritti nirodha. Yoga is samadhi. And the second sense it's used in is yoga is a method to help you achieve that goal. I guess the next question then is, what's the point of controlling the mind? What's the point of keeping the mind still or focused? And again, Patanjali is quite clear. In the third sutra, he says, when the mind is controlled in this way, then the self, or the seer, or consciousness, it's established in its own form. It manifests as its pure self. Form is perhaps the wrong word because it's formless. But consciousness forms itself after or into the different kind of thought forms that we have in the mind normally. And in samadhi state, in the state of concentration, then the self is in its natural state, not connected with the mind, but in its pure, innate, pure state. So, if we are talking about yoga, Ashtanga yoga as a practice of Patanjali yoga, and I think one of the reasons why teachers question the purpose of yoga is because if they're doing lots of asanas, it's hard perhaps to see the connection between doing all the asanas and a meditation practice. But if we're talking about Ashtanga yoga, then the purpose of practice is self-realization, is self-knowledge, self-understanding. And, according to all the literature, the rishis, all the literature about yoga, our problems result from not knowing who we are and the various attachments, various forms of ignorance that result from that. So the 5 kleshas we spoke about previously being ignorance about our true nature, ego, attachment, aversion, and fear. So these are the consequences of not knowing who we are. And according to yoga, we are eternal, deathless beings. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be attached to externally. There is just pure consciousness. That's who we are, according to yoga. So, today we wanted to talk about the 3 internal limbs, which are Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi.
Right. And so I guess, there's the outside world, which is why some people might be practicing, but that's still in the outside world and in the outside limbs, there's practice with a level of ignorance. And so then moving it inwards to these next three limbs through the pratyahara, which is sensory withdrawal, then we come into looking towards pure consciousness.
We could say that the external limbs are the means and the internal limbs are the goal. Mm-hmm. And really, although there are three internal limbs, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, which are translated usually as concentration, meditation, and Samadhi. Samadhi is not something you can, there's a equivalent word for in the English language. These three practices, according to Patanjali's description, actually all merge one into the other. So whenever one goes into Samadhi, you start with concentration, that then moves towards meditation, and then meditation merges in Samadhi. It's called samyama.
If I'm correct, I guess it's the sixth limb. Like the sixth limb is focusing, and there's a drastu and a drishti, which is where there's a focus point and a focuser, and then as you move into the next limb, then they both merge. It's like a process of dissolving duality. In Dhyana, yes, moving from Dhyana into Samadhi, this is a merging process that happens. In the first stage, there is the seer and the seen, and the thing is that the mind, the confusing thing for most people, when we in Western psychology we think of the mind-body duality, and the person or self is considered to be a part of the mind, whereas in yoga philosophy, the mind is more considered to be part of the body, an extension of the body, something housed in the brain, and consciousness is something separate and different from both the mind and the body. So the mind is also the seen, and what is contained within the mind is also the seen. So in the Samadhi state, he describes how the consciousness merges with the mind, which is then merging also with the object, which is being meditated on. The mind and the self or consciousness appear to be empty of their own form, and the only thing that shines in the mind is the object, which is being looked at, which is being concentrated on. That's the Samadhi state.
I wanted to ask you two questions. One, what is the difference between concentration and meditation? How one becomes the other?
Yeah, I think we have to back up a little bit as well, because concentration, although it's described as the first internal limb, it's actually concentration is there throughout. Patanjali defines concentration as fixing the attention in one place. So, whenever you perform any kind of action, concentration is required. So dharana is actually the first thing you do. You stand in samasthiti, you stand on your mat, and you concentrate on the posture, the form your body is taking. You concentrate on the bandha, you concentrate on the breath, you concentrate on the drishti. These are all forms of dharana. These are all forms of concentration. So right from the beginning, concentration is there. He distinguishes between concentration and meditation by giving an analogy, or rather the commentary of Vyasa explains by virtue of an analogy. In concentration, there is a concentration on an object, but then there's also distraction. So the mind is focusing on something, but it gets distracted. So it keeps coming back to the object.
In and out.
Yeah. Whereas in meditation, the mind, all thoughts are flowing in the same direction.
You entered like a zone.
But the consciousness and the mind and the object still have a certain sense of separation, in the sense that consciousness is flowing, the thoughts are flowing towards the object. In the Samadhi state, there's a complete samyama, there's a complete connection between the three. The mind, this is sampradnyata samadhi, the cognitive samadhi. The consciousness, the mind and the object are all fused as one in one object. Now, the difference between concentration and meditation, the analogy he uses is when you are concentrating, it's a bit like if you pour water, water kind of forms separate droplets dripping. Whereas if you pour oil or honey, the flow of oil or honey is continuous. There's no separation between the individual thoughts. All the thoughts are flowing, like the pouring of oil or the pouring of honey, in the same direction. So that's the distinction between Dharana and Dhyana. In Samadhi, there's a complete merging of consciousness with the mind and with the object.
So is Samadhi sort of like a thoughtless state, or?
Samadhi, well, many types of Samadhi. It means initially one thought.
Okay.
One thought. Or one object of thought. It could be a feeling also. It could be an experience. So he describes 4 different levels or 6 different levels of Samprajñāta Samadhi. The first one is called Vitarka, which means concentration using an object, physical, material object, gross object. And then the second stage is called Savichara, which is a concentration on a subtle object. It's more on the level of feeling. And then the third one is Ananda Samadhi, so concentration on the feeling of bliss. So it's being with the bliss. And then the fourth stage he describes as Asmita, which means
without ego.
Concentration on the feeling of being a self.
Okay.
So these are sort of felt experiences, thought experiences at the mundane level, moving towards a felt experience or a feeling of emptiness of thoughts and moving towards an experience of the true self.
Okay.
So does that mean that Samadhi like shows up in Dharana as well as Dhyana? Do you know, or would you say that Samadhi is kind of like after those things?
Well, they are described in sequence. Mm-hmm. When you're concentrating, you have moments of concentration and moments of distraction. In moments of concentration, then actually you're probably potentially entering Dhyana and Samadhi as well. This is one way of looking at it. Another way of thinking about it is, according to yoga philosophy, you can never think of 2 things at the same time. Thoughts follow each other. So, we talk about multitasking, that you're thinking about several things at the same time. According to yoga, that's not possible. Only one thing can be in the mind at a time. And between the one thing and the next thing, there's actually a small gap. But because we have so many thoughts, we don't notice the gap at all. One of the ideas in yoga is to try and increase that feeling of space between the thoughts. What is there in the space between the thoughts? This is actually an experience of the true self. This is actually Samadhi.
So, question, stupid question time. When you think about the space between each thought, isn't that a thought?
It's not a question of thinking about it. I mean, we're thinking about it now. It's what you experience in between the thoughts.
But as soon as you catch yourself experiencing it, you're having a thought about it. So then you're out.
Well, we're out
Quote
anyway,
unquote.
because the space between the thoughts is so small that you're not noticing it.
Okay. Space is... Okay.
So the idea is, if you could concentrate on one thing or no thing, let's say for 5 minutes, then that would be quite a big space between the thought that comes before and the thought that comes afterwards.
Yeah.
If it was a millisecond, you wouldn't notice it, of course.
Yeah. But sometimes I catch myself maybe like a couple of seconds, but as soon as I think about that, that's a thought itself, and then it starts all over again.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
So one of the prime techniques is pranayama, of moving in that direction. So, the mind and breath being totally connected, when you hold the breath, when the breath stops, the mind is also arrested to some extent. Eventually, if the body and mind are in good condition, as the breath stops, the mind also is able to stop. And ayama means to increase. So what we're trying to do with pranayama is to increase the length of breath and increase the length of holding. This stretches the space between the thoughts. Each new breath is a vritti, is like a thought, or is like a new action. And so the idea is to kind of create space between the actions.
Yeah, so it's basically a technique to help you.
Absolutely, yes.
Going forward. And then it's something that you can
Yes.
sort of pass the term, you can train on and then expand.
Yeah, so pranayama is, in a certain sense, moving from the gross to the subtle. So moving more into the being able to control the mind in more depth. And meditation is also a kind of pranayama in a sense, but there you're not using the breath explicitly, although the breath does actually stop because the breath is related to what's going on in the mind. So the more your mind gets still, the slower your breath becomes, and even in deep states of concentration, the breath stops altogether. I don't know if you ever noticed that. If you're very...
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you catch yourself, it's like, oh my God, I haven't been breathing or something.
Right.
When you like do a task or something like that.
Exactly, yeah.
So I had a question about, we talked about pranayama already, but when is a good time for pranayama? Like, would you recommend it after practice or before practice? Or is there a difference? Are you more like prone to have a meditation like after you've done all the practice, or what's the deal?
The ideal time for meditation, if we're talking meditation, pranayama is a practice itself.
Yeah.
So it's moving from a dynamic, physical, body-oriented practice towards something more subtle where you're keeping the body in a nice steady state, and you're just moving the lungs, you're just moving the breath, you're just moving the bandhas. So if you wake up in the morning and your body is really stiff, and you're feeling kind of lethargic and heavy, then pranayama might be quite challenging for you. Meditation will be challenging for you. It would be a good idea to do some asana practice first, to stretch a little bit, and then to be able to sit comfortably for a good period of time. So pranayama would be better after practice. But if you've been practicing asanas for a while and your body is in a good state, then you'll find that the time, depending what time you get up, depending what time you normally practice, but if the time between, let's say, 3:30, 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. is ideal for meditation. That's a really quiet time of day where it's naturally you can go into a deep state of meditation. If you're waking up at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., then that may not be so ideal. But so I think as a beginning student, probably the best thing is to practice asanas first and then practice pranayamas. And then maybe through pranayama, you start to develop a meditation practice. And even, pranayama is like a big word. Even after doing asana practice and you were sitting and breathing, watching your breath, or just breathing quietly, or not even being aware of your breathing, meditation can also start to happen at that point. But once your body feels in a good state, and once you're in a rhythm, natural, good rhythm, because these practices only work with repetition. So if you meditate once a week, or once a month, or once a year, something like that, then it's not really going to get you very far. If you get into a daily practice, if you have an asana practice daily and your body feels good, then perhaps it would be sensible to get up early in the morning and do your meditation before you do your asana practice. So once the sun rises, the energy starts moving in the body, it starts moving in the world. That's the time for doing more active type practices. And just before the sunrise, and also just around sunset, are two times where nature really supports meditation. There's nighttime is governed by the tamasic aspect, the heavy, dark, sleepy time, and daytime is governed by rajas, which is hot and light and active. And between those two is a time of sattva domination. So just around sunrise and just around sunset are the two ideal times for practicing meditation.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just about to ask you why those specific times are so undeniably interesting in a way. Like you always feel more in tune with what's around you. And yeah, so you answered it.
Nature supports. And if you observe outside, for instance, if you're by the water, if you're by a lake, just around sunrise and just around sunset, the wind drops, animal activity drops. There's a kind of serenity and peace in nature. And, we are natural beings. We are physical beings. Our bodies are connected with the material and energetic world outside. So, of course, living in the big city like New York.
We can try Central Park, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Probably we're kind of insulated to a great extent from the natural rhythms, and we're much more affected by all the activity that goes on around us. But having said that, of course, from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. is actually the quietest time in the city too, because before 4 a.m. there's still people out partying.
Yeah, true. Between 4 and 6, the train are running like on a slower schedule.
Yeah.
Cool. Interesting.
So going back to the original kind of thought, what is the purpose of yoga practice? I see, practice being the external limbs. The purpose of the external limbs is to be able to achieve the internal limbs. Yeah. And the internal limbs are all about self-knowledge, self-awareness. And this, according to yogis, having the experience of samadhi is a bit like having the experience of sleep. If you imagine you didn't have sleep, what a horrible state you'd be in.
Yeah.
Samadhi is an original natural state that everyone used to experience, according to the rishis, but it's been lost. And this is the reason why we have so much distress and confusion. People don't know who they are anymore. They identify them with their bodies, with their careers, and etc. And through experiencing samadhi, or through experiencing meditation, we get a much more wholesome, true, authentic feeling of who we are. We reconnect with our true essence, with consciousness itself. So this is why it's valuable and important. We feel refreshed through that.
But, I was just thinking about, so all these big legendary yoga masters are under the microscope now because of all the stuff that's been happening. And we're talking about the means of practice as sort of like something that helps you through the internal limbs and through self-awareness and self-knowledge and knowing who you are. So how come all these maybe how come, it's not the right question, but why people that should be so much further ahead in their practice and in their concept, experience of self-awareness then end up just acting as if they don't know who they are?
Well, I think the first question you have to ask is, why are they so famous?
Yeah, that's...
Because a person who is really focusing on meditation and internal practices is not going to advertise that. They'll be sitting somewhere quietly and enjoying the peace and bliss and meditation they're experiencing. And if there are sincere seekers, they'll come to them and maybe they'll teach something. But those who are out there advertising themselves, making a career out of teaching yoga, like myself, we're obviously the corrupted form. We're not the true yogis.
Well, that's kind of like a fine line. You have to teach at some point what you know, otherwise it'll all be lost.
Well, you have to know something first, really, before you teach. That would be advisable.
Yeah, or even if you're a couple of steps ahead, then... Yeah.
No, I think really what I was getting at is what does asana have to do with yoga? When you say big yogis, what's big about the yogis? The ego, the bank account, the fame?
All the above.
But what about the state of realization? What about deep states of samadhi? What about knowledge?
Right, like these people might be people who practice yoga to an extent, and the extent might be limb number 3 or maybe limb number 4 pranayama. But then that's where they've maxed out, and now they have really, their ego is large in the fact that they've been branded or advertised, but it's still at a limit because they're not really able to teach the internal limbs.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but at some point, if you do like a lifetime of practice, shouldn't that sort of like at some point something should click and then start drawing you inwards?
Maybe one lifetime is not enough.
Yeah. Oh my God, you're coming up with these answers like, okay, mind blown, one after the other.
Yeah,
we also said right at the beginning, yoga teachers saying that they don't know what the purpose of yoga is, why practice yoga. This is why there's so much confusion. It's because the teachers are not giving the proper guidance, and they're not bridging the gap between this interest in asana and the internal practices or the internal limbs. And part of that is because the general population is much more interested in the physical benefits. So it's beautiful, wonderful, but also a kind of tragic consequence of the spiritual practice that it gives you a beautiful body and good health and all those sort of physical benefits. So those can be sought after for their own sake, and forget about the spiritual practice. Just look good in a bikini, So it's very easy to bypass and miss the purpose and just enjoy the practice for some other reason.
That purpose.
Yeah. And good health is what's wrong with good health? Of course, it's wonderful, but it's a little bit like not getting the. I don't know, if you had a Ferrari, as a Lamborghini, as we started off talking about, and you used it to drive at 1 mile an hour or 5 miles an hour just to the local village and back, but you never put your foot down and took it to enjoy it driving at 200 miles an hour. It's like using asana practice for some very mundane purpose. And unfortunately, if you get totally obsessed with the physicality of it, then it can also lead you in totally the wrong direction and, get you into a lot of trouble.
I mean, yeah, it's also interesting. Like, I mean, the body in itself is like it's like right in your face. It's like the most like impermanent thing there is. We're growing every second. So it changes. It's like, what are you chasing? If you're just like your body will decay no matter what you do.
Unless you practice yoga, and then you'll have eternal youth. So that's another unfortunate factor.
The side effect.
Because people are obsessed with staying young today. So
I'm unfortunately still 15, as that's when I started practicing yogasana.
Yeah, that's what Lino used to say all the time. It's like, when did you start practicing yoga? It's like, 29. You'll be 29 forever. It's like, when did you start?
Well, I had a theory that for every year you practice, you get younger by a year.
Wow. Awesome. Okay, cool.
Dang it. I'm
excited.
0.
Yeah, I'm like -1 right now. I'm back in the womb. It feels like that. Here we are. Sometimes.
In here, right. In this particular room, it feels like we're back there.
We're back in the womb. Yeah, we are. Interesting. So, I wanted to ask one more question about the samadhi. So, the first state of samadhi, you say it's concentration on an object that's outside of you. So
could
it
be
like,
inside you as well.
Oh,
like a bandha, drishti.
I think of breath sometimes.
Breath.
Okay, so you would focus on the flow of the breath, for example.
Could be the flow of the breath, or
holding the bandha.
The bandha.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that basically answers the question, because I was thinking if there is like outside objects that are like that would help you more than others.
Sure, there are some.
You know,
if you think about what's gonna bring you to a state of bliss, because that's really what samadhi is all about. So if you have a true guru, if you have a teacher who has divine qualities, or somebody who has really beautiful qualities, to meditate on that person, that could be a method. That on a picture of them meditating on a candle flame, light.
What's so fascinating about fire? That, like, it's been there like forever, and we just look at it, and it's just hypnotizing.
Well, they say that the soul is basically also the internal light. The eternal truth is a light, an internal light. Something you'll see at a certain point.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
The Vibhuti Pada, which is the third book in the Yoga Sutras, it goes through a list of things you can focus on. And so you can focus on the pit of the throat, or you can focus on, I think there's one it's like focusing on friendliness will make you very friendly.
Okay.
So if you like meditate on being strong, then you will get very strong. Like if you meditate on an elephant, then you'll become as strong as an elephant. And so I think that section like really speaks to the power of the mind. Like,
is this sort of like connected to the power of like visualization?
Well, actually, it's speaking about powers, and these are regarded.
Powers.
Well, yeah, these are regarded as distractions, unfortunately.
No powers.
Yeah.
even if the exalted beckon, do not become attached, or suffering will recur.
Yeah, they say these are the major distractions, major problems, and perhaps this is one answer to one of the questions that you asked about the great yogis that we have fallen.
It's a trick.
They have perhaps developed certain really potent powers, and they've been corrupted by those powers,
Okay.
Like you focused on a handstand, and then you got a handstand, but now you're like trapped in handstand world where you're like attached to the handstand that you've gotten.
Or perhaps more, if you're very totally obsessed with the body, then maybe you become a little bit seduced by other people, and you get prone to sexual abuse and so on.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
So yeah, the powers are generally regarded as distractions and temptations, things. They are consequences potentially, but they should not be pursued for their own end. Alternative types of thoughts to meditate on would be, the idea is to establish the seer, to feel the seer as it truly is, to feel consciousness, to experience consciousness as it is, beyond birth and death. So focusing on things like the difference between consciousness, which is formless, never changes, eternal, and the elements of mind, which are going through constant fluctuation. So this is one type of concentration meditation that leads you deeper. Focusing on, what changes, what is eternal. Questioning, who am I? Who am I really? When answers come to you in your mind, you realize that's not who you are. This takes you to a deeper point. Questioning is called vichara, which was put forward very much by Ramana Maharshi as a method. You can look at essence as opposed to substance. So all these things are taking you towards the feeling of the pure consciousness. That's the direction you want to go in. So meditating on the strength of an elephant might be helpful if you were trying to lift a piano or something like that. But if you were trying to know the self, it would not be particularly useful.
Mm-hmm. Do we each have a consciousness with its own particular traits that are, specific to each of us?
The Atman.
That's a good question. According to Sankhya and yoga, as it's associated with Sankhya, there are multiple Purushas, multiple souls.
What's Sankhya?
Sankhya is the philosophy that is paired with yoga.
Okay.
There are 6 systems of Indian philosophy, and they're paired, they're coupled together. So Sankhya is...
and I'm sure there is a list of something at some point.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Sankhya has a whole list.
That. Okay.
24 different categories of existence.
And the first one is the one that encompasses them all.
Well, the first one, in a sense, is Purusha, the soul, the spirit.
Okay.
And as seen separate from that is what's called Prakriti, which is nature. And Prakriti has all these different evolutes, these different subforms. So in its kind of unevolved form, Prakriti, all the gunas are in balance. This is also the state of the mind in Samadhi. Then the mind starts to condense as the attention starts to become more extroverted. So the first condensation of the mind is called buddhi. And then the next one's called ahamkara. And then the next one's called manas. And then out of these manifest the different sense organs and aspects of the body and so on, the elements. So Sankhya is a bit like, I think a good translation for the word Sankhya is science. It's the way the yogis looked at the material world and defined and described all the different elements of the world with the intention of saying, I am not that.
So I
am something else. I am a Purusha. I am a soul. But let's just go back, because the question was: do we have individual souls,
with
or do we have one
traits?
soul?
Yeah.
Advaita Vedanta says there's only one consciousness, and we're all part of that one. So one way of looking at it is we're like little drops of water belonging to a huge ocean. And another way of thinking about it is that this little individual drop of consciousness is associated with a specific subtle form which manifests then through a body, through an incarnation, which then, after death, gets reabsorbed into the ether in a certain sense and manifests again into another bodily form. So that this drop of consciousness, which is actually part of the whole ocean, which is not different from the whole ocean, seems to have characteristics or traits which don't really belong to it, but they belong to the material, the Prakriti aspect, the part that incarnates. So from a certain point of view, you could say, yes, we have individual souls which are associated with past experience. And from another point of view, you could say, no, we don't have individual souls. It is all one consciousness. Consciousness is just a condition of the universe, which is different from the material condition. It's a different dimension. You tap into that dimension, it's universal.
Okay. What were you saying earlier, Alexis?
Oh yeah, that's basically what I was gonna say.
Oh, okay. Word by word.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you're wearing a costume, but like essentially it's the same source. Same source, just different form. It's like...
Well, the costume is a good analogy for the body and the mind.
Yeah.
But the person who's wearing it.
Right.
You could say like we're all showroom dummies.
We're all what?
Oh, well, that's an English expression. What do you call those?
We do not understand that.
A mannequin?
Mannequin.
Showroom dummy.
But a showroom a dummy is a good good analogy.
Interesting.
And it's a universal, all those mannequins are identical. Mm-hmm. But each mannequin is dressed in a different set of clothing.
So based on the way they're dressed, then you can sort of like see, this is more rock and roll, this is more like eclectic, or so each one kind of seems different, but in the essence...
But that describes it, yeah.
So at first glance, they look different, but then when you look deep down...
When you look at... if you take the clothes off, everyone looks the same.
Yeah.
Naked.
Yeah.
It's like if Purusha, which this is going to be a not good metaphor, but if Purusha is like cookie dough, and then you take cookie dough and you make it into different shaped cookies, then that's the form. That's like Prakriti. And so, you know, like we're all made of the same thing, but then we just show up differently.
Just like cookies.
Yes, but again, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. The cookie dough is the Prakriti element, and the Purusha does not take any form.
What?
The Purusha does not take any form. The consciousness does not take form.
Right.
It appears to take form, but the form is on the Prakriti side. So consciousness fills whatever form you put in front of it.
That would be the dough.
So whatever thought, whatever body, whatever experience you're having, consciousness fills that. And that's why it seems to be identified with that, because that's the limitation of the form. And all you're really seeing is the form. But the forms which consciousness appears to take are actually forms of Prakriti.
Like putting water in a cup, maybe.
Exactly.
And you think it's a cup, yeah.
Any kind of container.
Yeah.
And that's another analogy for explaining what happens after death. So we talk about
take it out of the cup.
Talk about air, not water.
Yeah.
Space. So the body is often likened to a clay pot. What happens when you break the clay pot? Does the space inside disappear? No, it doesn't. It just merges with. It was already merged with what is outside. So the body dies. The clay pot is destroyed. But the space inside it remains just as it was before.
Yeah. In that regard, I have a question. Okay, so your soul, that's what it's been in your body, right? In your physical dummy. Then after you die, you say it goes back to the... let's say to the source, or to the thing. But then does that same soul then like goes into another body, keeping sort of like does each individual soul stay the same, or?
Well, this is obviously quite theoretical.
Like, does your consciousness stay the same?
You don't remember?
The consciousness is the universal principle. So what actually moves from one body to the next body is what's known as the causal body, which is a very subtle form of matter. It's still on the material level. So we have 5 bodies, according to yoga: the physical, the pranic body, the mental body, the intellectual body, and then the 5th body is called the body of bliss, or the causal body. So when you die, the first 4 bodies disappear. But what is contained within the causal body are the samskaras, the memories, and the results of your experiences. So somewhere, in a very subtle form, your life has been recorded. And somehow, when you get a new body, which is going to have a different genetic makeup, a different sex possibly, you'll be learning a new language. Those memories and samskaras incarnate into that new body. And the mix of those 2 elements, as well as all your conditioning and your life experience and your relationship with your parents and etc., will create a whole new personality. But there is an essence which comes from before. So this is how karma then moves from one lifetime to the next lifetime. So
then when you talk about karma from different lifetimes or your past experiences, past life experiences, they're all linked through that specific causal body.
Exactly.
How did they figure this out?
Well, some people apparently can see these things, you know.
Cool.
Didn't get there yet. I'll let you know.
Please, you know.
Or you can let me know.
Okay, whoever gets there first.
Right.
Okay.
It's a deal.
Okay, done. $20. Cool. Did you guys want to add anything else on this discussion, or?
I think that
we kind of covered
this is a pretty good coverage. Yeah. I mean, I think that reincarnation is another conversation.
Yeah, true. It's kind of like opens up the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but like, thank you guys so much for completing the chapters of the
Yeah, we
sutras.
sort of like, went through the 8 limbs.
Yeah.
And, you know, plus minus other tangents and stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's kind of cool.
Cool.
Good. All right. Well,
Yeah.
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Boring announcements. yogisontheroad@gmail.com if you want to message us or, you know, have questions for Guy or anything like that.
Yeah, or feedback for us, you can subscribe to the podcast or rate us, because then we can get more sharing of this information. We covered a lot of things on very surface level. If you have more questions, we're happy to expand to the extent that we have experienced them. Yeah.
Yeah, and also Yogis on the Road website coming up for 2020. That's pretty cool. So you can find all the people that we've interviewed. And
and Guy, where can people find you?
nowhere.
You mean on the internet?
Sure. Or in real life.
Well, our website for the yoga studio is ashtangayoga.nyc. And the Charlotte is in Manhattan on Broadway, 666 Broadway.
Yeah,
That's where we can be found.
Yeah.
Yeah, the entrance is actually right next door, so it's not quite 666.
Yeah, it has 2
we
numbers.
skipped that for like, you know,
I think it's also 658.
something like that.
Yeah, so you can make a choice. In fact, you can't go through the 666 door
No,
at the moment.
that door is closed.
You can only go through 658.
The security guard practices japa mala. So you'll know that it's the right door.
Shout out to Angira
Yeah, shout out to Angira.
for being nice to us every morning. Okay, thanks, guys. Awesome.